Hello and welcome to the Amateur of Life and Death podcast. I'm Luke Plimmer.
And I'm Liz Plumpton. Welcome to Season 3 of the podcast, Luke. Hopefully you've recovered from being absurdly nice and good-humoured as Mr. Bingley in Pride and Prejudice recently.
Well, what a charming experience it was. I am sincerely glad that it had been possible.
Only disappointed that you didn't grow any mutton chops.
I tried my best, actually.
Oh, okay.
I was told back in July that I couldn't get my hair cut, and I had to let it grow long. But then, I'm a teacher by day, so the week before going back to school, I sort of had to find that balance between I need to let it be long, but I need to tidy it up. And then I got it trimmed a bit. And then, ironically, as we were coming to the end of the actual show run for Pride and Prejudice, I thought, it's coming through now, the sideburns.
It in no way damaged your performance.
Excellent. Yes. So each episode takes a look at a different aspect of the wonderful world of amateur theatre and features an amateur theatre maker talking about their theatrical life, theatrical loves, and the times when they've died on stage.
This month's episode focuses on the work of a giant of modern British theatre, Harold Pinter. Luke and I will be talking to Graeme Braidwood, who is directing the Crescent Theatre Birmingham's upcoming production of two one-act Pinter plays, A Kind of Alaska and Ashes to Ashes.
And we'll be delving into the archives to find out a bit more about the Crescent Theatre's history of producing Pinter's work.
So, what are some of the defining features of a play by Harold Pinter? Generally, the following are understood to be Pinteresque features. 1. Pauses and silences.
2. Menace or implied threat.
3. Colloquial or conversational language.
4. Apparent triviality.
5. Dark or sinister comedy.
6. The volatility and elusiveness of the past.
And 7. Power struggles. Luke and I are delighted to be joined now by Graeme Braidwood. Graeme is a theatre photographer and the director of the two one-act Pinter plays that the Crescent Theatre is producing in October this year. Hi, Graeme.
Hello.
Thank you so much for agreeing to come on the podcast. I know it's not your first experience of the podcast, but your first as our main or studio guest.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about the great man in general, first of all.
Yes.
What was your first experience of Pinter's work?
When I was at college, so I was at Middlesex Polytechnic doing a degree in performing arts. And in the second year, I helped a third year project do their version of The Lover.
Yeah.
And which went on, didn't think much of it. And then the next year, when I became a third year, some friends had been recommended by tutors to do The Lover again for their special exercise. So lots of marks for that. Wanted me to direct it. I said, I don't think I want to do that. I didn't really like the one from the year before. And he said, well, we don't really have an alternative. Can you not just read it? I thought I knew it, but anyway, I went away and read it. Realised what the previous year's production had got wrong and thought, this is great. I love this play. Yeah, let's do this. And it was great. I loved it.
And that is, I think, a one-act two-hander?
Yes, about 40 minutes. Yeah.
So not dissimilar to the two pieces that you're directing at the moment.
Yeah.
And if you can, what do you think it is that you particularly like about Pinter?
Yes. It's hard to describe. I think it's hard to describe how he works, how he writes, and it's hard to describe the attraction of what he does. I have thought a lot actually about, a lot of people actually say, or come to me, even doing this one, and say, don't really get Pinter, or even a friend of my mum's who is coming to see it, but said, I don't see the point of Pinter. And you kind of understand where they're coming from. He writes, it's very distinctive. I think there's nothing like him. The rhythm, the poetry, the kind of otherworldliness of his world. It's just kind of just a little bit removed from our own, pushed into a slightly darker place, you know, a sort of 60s darker monochrome place, and usually with a fair bit of menace attached to it. No, I love it.
What do you see as like the key challenges of producing Pinter's plays as both an actor and as a director?
There are a couple that come to mind. One is that an actor and a director tries to find the truth of the play, and normally I kind of think, well, that's my strong suit. You know, I kind of feel that I know when an actor is being truthful or theatrical, and I can put that right.
Yeah.
With Pinter, it's really hard to know what's true. You know, he has said of his own work that, you know, what's true and what's not true can exist at the same time. You know, it's like he's playing a sort of quantum Jenga game with us about truth, and it's difficult to know. So you end up having these conversations in the rehearsal room. It's like, so this person that you're talking about now, well, I don't think he existed. It's like, oh, really? Okay, right. And yes, so there's that. The rhythm of it is very different. So he's famous for the pause. Pause, silences. And I think that they should be played. They are like another line. So they have to be played. And that makes the rhythm of it different to a normal playwright. But that goes against what an actor normally wants to do. You know, want to put in their own pauses. And it pushes it, his rhythm pushes it slightly outside of a normal rhythm. So constantly you're fighting against your normal instincts. There's quite a lot to work on.
What is your favourite Pinter play, if you have one?
The Homecoming. We did it at the Crescent, 2008. And I remember watching it as a director and thinking, and every scene, I had an enjoyment, an anticipation of what is about to come. That scene, the words that they were going to use, how funny it was, the rhythm of it. It was just great. I've never had that before or since. It's like a piece of music, you know, you get a visceral enjoyment from the rhythm and the music. And I got that from The Homecoming. And the whole cast, we loved it so much, and it was over far too quickly. We did it again. We hired the theatre 6 months later, hired the theatre, hired the props, hired the costume, did it again, which seems really weird now. I can't believe we actually did it, but we really wanted to see those people again, you know, and hear what they said. So it has to be The Homecoming.
I have to say, Graeme, that was actually the first show I ever saw at the Crescent.
Oh, right.
I know. I think I'd probably been cast in the studio show after it, so I thought, oh yeah, I'll go along and, you know, see what it's like. And I do remember sort of having that kind of like a great feeling of like, oh, I've joined the theatre and they do really, you know, this is really great, but also, oh shit, I don't think the thing that we're doing in a couple of weeks is as good as this, and now we've got to follow it up. But it was a fantastic production.
So you're currently directing two one-act Pinter plays, A Kind of Alaska and Ashes to Ashes, which are being performed in the Crescent studio from the 21st to the 28th of October. So tell us about those two pieces.
Two really interesting pieces. Not done a lot, to my knowledge. And A Kind of Alaska is especially interesting because most of his work comes from an image from his head or a line that he had. And A Kind of Alaska is the only one that comes from a real event that was inspired by a book written by Oliver Sacks. And the Awakenings by Oliver Sacks also became the the Hollywood film with Robin Williams. So about a woman who developed sleeping sickness. It happened in 1916, and Oliver Sacks pioneered a treatment to awaken people who'd fall into that. And Ashes to Ashes, one of his later plays, and he stripped everything down. Later on he decided that he didn't like people coming in and out, stripped everything down, and it's just two people talking, really. But it's difficult to know where they are, who these people are, what they're talking about, whether what they're talking about has any truth, or it's really interesting.
So, as you said, Kind of Alaska is based on a real phenomenon and some history. Have you and the cast done any research into that in preparing for the play?
No, I got the sense from the company that wasn't what they really wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
I would have been happy to do that, but but I think it's a fair enough choice to say we're doing the play. The play is very different to the film. It's very different from the book that it came from. So you do the play. It stands on its own. So no, I mean I watched the film because I'd never seen that before. I bought the book and then found it was above my intellectual station, so I didn't really read that. But yes, I've read a lot about it, but I'm not sure that we've really brought much of that, past to our show.
It's one of those, it sort of strikes me as one of those real events that's so bizarre. If you didn't know it was real, you could kind of imagine it would be something in a Pinter play. Maybe not the focus of it, but the kind of thing that might be almost casually just mentioned by somebody in one of those odd bits of dialogue where you think, is that real?
I know. Well, I'm amazed that I didn't know about it. I mean, 5 million people had this sickness. Didn't know about it. I mean, obviously, we learn a lot about what else was going on in that period, 1916. And I suppose it just gets, buried under what the world was going through. But 5 million people caught this. A third of them died. I just didn't know.
So Pinter is quoted as having said, "I think we communicate only too well in our silence in what is unsaid." A notable feature of his writing is the use of the pause, as we've mentioned. So how were you approaching the pauses and silences in A Kind of Alaska and Ashes to Ashes? I know you've already mentioned this, but is there anything you wanted to expand on there with that?
Just that I haven't done anything in the beginning. I thought we don't really have the time to go through every pause and every silence and talk about it, and actually that would be really tedious. I did one job at the National Theatre in a as one of their big shows, and we sat around a table for 2 weeks talking about the script, and it was incredibly boring. But as you go along, the pauses and the silences start to speak more and more, and especially the silences. That's where the characters really have their crises. So I think the pauses can be, as long as they're in the right place, they can be elongated or shortened by the actor. But the silences, they're the crucial ones where things are said, on a deeper plane that any words would express.
Sure.
Really.
Yeah.
So how do the actors differentiate between a pause and a silence?
I'm not sure that they did at the beginning, and I don't think I really understood that at the beginning. But I just think it becomes really clear the more you rehearse it that a pause is, it's a thought, and you sort of cross something on the other end of the pause, but the silence, that's where something deep happens. And it's obvious. I think it's hard to describe. It's obvious when it happens in front of you and it's played correctly.
So Harold Pinter was an actor and a director as well as a writer. And I know that you have been in at least one Pinter play as an actor. Yes, yep. Played Stanley. What are the rewards and challenges of being in a Pinter play for the actor, do you think?
It's a while ago. My experience of actually being in one. I don't know. Honestly, I'm not sure that there's much difference between a director and an actor. I remember it was a huge challenge, actually, to understand who your character was, what was happening to him, what had happened to him, who are these people coming in to interrogate him, and why. And actually, I don't think I ever answered that. Or maybe you don't have to answer that.
Yeah, maybe.
But I do remember, especially the interrogation, the why did the chicken cross the road bit. That was really hard. As an acting challenge, that's really quick. I'm not sure that we ever got that completely right, actually, during the run, which is frustrating. And above that, I'm not sure I can remember.
How do you sell it to actors then? Because, you've mentioned that Pinter can be a bit Marmite. Some people say, I don't really get it, or I don't really understand it, or what's it all about? Why do actors want to be in his plays, maybe? That's a better question.
Well, it's different to what they'll get in any other play. Sarah, who's in both of our one-act plays here, says it's the biggest acting test that she's ever had. And that's part of it, isn't it? And Douglas Hodge his career has had a big connection with Pinter. And he said, once he'd fallen into that Pinter thing, he lost 10 years to do Pinter shows. And I can see that, you do. I remember doing Homecoming and thinking, what's next? Because we thought, we could do The Caretaker. Great, fantastic. Yeah, let's do The Caretaker. Yeah. It never happened.
Because he died that year, didn't he?
He did. And now I'm thinking, after doing these, gosh, wouldn't it be wonderful? Do Betrayal, do a Hot House, just want to do the next one. Don't want to do another play, I just want to do another Pinter. And I haven't had that from another playwright.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is, really. Sorry.
Well, arts manager, what do you think?
It depends on the rights, Luke.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, since Harold Pinter died in 2008, his estate quite severely restricted amateur rights, and also there was a huge professional revival of his back catalogue, which seemed to go on for about 10 years. So we might be coming out a little bit out of the other side of that.
Okay. Well, as well as being an actor and a director, you have been a professional stage manager and a professional theatre photographer. So how does the experience of those other roles inform and overlap with what you do on stage and in rehearsals?
I think being a stage manager, I've seen lots of rehearsal rooms, worked with a lot of professional directors, and that informs a lot of what I do here at the Crescent and elsewhere as a director. I've learned, I think, probably some shortcuts, what works and what doesn't, that maybe somebody else, would have to work out for themselves. Also, design-wise, it helps. You kind of know, as a stage manager, rudiments of lighting design, sound design, set, that really helps. The theatre photography, I think the directing informs my theatre photography a lot, but I don't think the other way around. I think all of my philosophy as a theatre photographer comes from what I like as a director, as an audience member. And when I struggle as a theatre photographer in anything, it hasn't happened for a while, but it's because I don't like the direction of it. It's sort of clashed with what I want it to be.
Yeah,
but it doesn't happen very often.
Okay, that's fair enough. So, tell us about your first love.
So, I think it's a place, actually.
Okay.
So, my parents took me and my brother to the New Vic in Stoke fairly frequently when we were growing up. So Wolverhampton to Stoke, it's not an inconsiderable distance, it's not down the road, but it was one of the earliest in the round theatres. And what I loved about it, so it was a converted cinema, and so the VOMs, the 4 VOMs, I mean, it's just like the new theatre, but the great thing about the VOMs was, because it was a converted building, in hindsight, I think the materials weren't that great. So when actors ran around to find their next entrance, you could hear them, and I think directors really lent on that, especially to build up tension. You could hear people, they're running to make their entrance. I've never experienced it in any other theatre. I was really disappointed when the new building didn't have that same, noise or atmosphere. But I loved that place. And when they did the Nottie in particular, which was about, how the railways, just the chaotic way that the railways just appeared in our industrial landscape, that was just an amazing show. And I just thought, wow, this is incredible.
So what's been the love of your theatrical life?
So I love doing the Homecoming. That would be a close second. But as a stage manager, I was working at the National Theatre. I was working in their education department. So I did small-scale tours of Shakespeare and then mid-scale tours, usually of Brecht. And there was one summer, sort of around 2000, maybe 1999, something like that. We were doing Twelfth Night, taking it around schools, but we also went to New York with the Lincoln Center. And whilst I was in New York, I got a call from the education department saying, we need more people for this show. Oh, What a Lovely War. But it was an amazing show. So it was done with circus tents. So this main huge circus tent with 2 satellite tents. So the idea was we'd go around parks or even barracks in the UK, and a circus troupe would put up the tents, and then we would arrive as stage management, followed by the actors. And they did this incredible production of Oh, What a Lovely War. I just loved it. I mean, I had very little to do with it because it was already running by the time I arrived. Everyone was amazing. It was incredible direction, but also that the production was it was a disaster in a way. It was far too big for the education department to do. It's lovely, a lovely idea to do Oh, What a Lovely War in tents, that Pierrot thing. It's great. Sure. However, try and do outdoor theatre, you suddenly realise how difficult that is. Putting up these huge circus tents with very little time to do it, on ground that sinks because, you know, it's been raining all the time. And the stories that were going round the stage management team of what Jenny Harris, who ran the education department, had to do, you know, the rules she had to break in order just to get that show on. Somebody said we were close to bringing down the National Theatre for the financial constraint. I don't know how true that is. I would like to think it's true because honestly, that show was worth it. It was incredible. Every time the last post was played, we all had to stop deadly still because it's a tent. You can hear anyone move. At that point, all the audience, you could hear a pin drop. Amazing. I mean, I just feel it now as well. It's like, gosh, that show was just incredible. The one regret, Joan Littlewood, who was still alive, did not come and see it. She refused to come and see it, but I think she would have loved it. I really do.
So tell us about the one that got away.
Okay. Weirdly, it goes back to when I first joined the Crescent Youth Theatre. Okay. So when I was 18, I don't know why I still think about this show, actually. But it was... So I'd discovered acting, you know, when you're young in the youth theatre. I'd just done Romeo in the musical sci-fi version called Star-Crossed. And the next one we were going to do was a Stoppard play, Dog's Hamlet and Cahoots Macbeth. And I just loved the idea of this play because it's about language, so that language and also about Cahoots Macbeth was about that time in Czechoslovakia when theatre was banned, and you know you had I don't even know if it's the Stasi, but certainly you know the police eavesdropping on people. People ended up doing theatre in their living room and being eavesdropped on and arrested, and there was something about the physicality of this play. You know, it spoke about the radicalness of theatre and why we needed it. And I've never managed to see a production of it. I've never seen one advertised. But I don't know why, it's just stuck with me. I just would love to do it.
So tell us about a time when you've died on stage.
Right. So, sort of a production at the Crescent that has become a bit infamous, really. We did Aladdin at the Old Theatre.
Okay.
A lot of the great and the good of that theatre were in it. A lot of people that are still around now will remember this show.
Okay.
There was a very virulent thing going around the cast.
Oh.
Sort of 24-hour bug that floored anybody that got it.
Okay.
So we would meet before the show and we would work out, the director would say, we can't do this because we haven't got so-and-so. And we go from this to this. And so, you know, every show was kind of patched together and sewn together. Saturday, 2 shows, and I got it. Got my parents to drive me to Birmingham and got through the first show. The cast went to a pub to get some food before the evening show. I couldn't face eating any food, so my 18-year-old self thought the logic was, if I have a pint of real ale, that will give me some kind of, you know,
that's
some goodness,
some airtight logic. Obviously.
And then I remember we were doing a scene, one of these sort of, it wasn't a front cloth, but it was very close to the footlights. And then I just remember seeing these footlights come towards me as I fainted, missing, I think, you know, by inches, my head on the footlights, and coming to, looking up, and the scene is still going on. They just left me there. but I remember them saying at the end, "Shall we take him off now?" Oh, and as I fell, I also heard some of the audience laugh. They just thought that was part of the action.
Did they ever figure out it wasn't? Let's pretend they didn't. Let's pretend they didn't.
Oh,
That's wow.
it was incredible. Yeah, amazing. Never fainted on stage before. Don't want to do it again.
Can you tell us a little bit more about how you joined the Crescent then, Graeme? You talked about your sort of earliest love of theatre and the New Vic, but you mentioned there that you were in the Crescent Youth Theatre. So tell us a bit about your relationship with the Crescent.
At school, there was very little drama. You didn't do drama at my school because that kind of meant you were a kind of questionable person.
Sure.
So didn't do very much. And then my dad was directing Aladdin at Cotsall Village Hall, Cotsall Amateur Dramatic Society. And I remember asking him one day, who's playing Aladdin? And he said, you are. It's like, really? It's like, I hadn't even considered that would be a thing. Did it, enjoyed it. And then Roma de Roper, as we do this, we're sitting next to the rehearsal room, named after Roma. She'd seen it because my parents worked with her and her husband in the teachers' union. Mm-hmm. So she'd seen me do Aladdin, and she said, why don't you come and join the Crescent? If she hadn't have said that, I wouldn't have joined the Crescent. I may never, have worked in the theatre. That'd probably be a very good thing, actually, financially speaking. But I was thinking about that today. My life would have been really different if Roma hadn't have seen me do that and said, come and join the Crescent. It'd be very different.
So you joined the youth theatre then?
Yes.
Or? Yeah.
Yeah, so about 1983, something like that. And then Romeo was my first show. And you imagine that you get Romeo as your first thing, you think, wow, this is
all going to be like this.
I know.
I'm just going to be the lead.
I'm going to do Hamlet in my 20s, Macbeth in my 30s. It's going to be fine. I'll be all right. Didn't work out, did that?
And how long were you at the Crescent in that first spell?
Good question. So I think I left to go to London sort of 86. The 86. So there was a member here who had given me a name. He said, if you ever need an equity card, because you needed an equity card in those days in order to work in professional theatre, and I had designs to be a professional actor, he said, gave me a name of an agent in London. He said, if you ever find yourself in London, this person will give you an equity card. When I went down to London, it was because I got an opportunity with the National Youth Theatre as part of a government kind of scheme. So I was an admin assistant for the National Youth Theatre when they were still at King's Cross, actually. And then when I decided that I just couldn't exist financially on what they were paying me, I thought, well, nothing else to do but call this guy, called Barry, see whether he could actually get me an equity card. And there started another adventure of very cheaply done children's theatre up and down the country, Clacton to Edinburgh, Sunderland. I shudder to think what some of these shows look like. We didn't rehearse. We just turned up, we did the show. And so lots of stories. But I would not change that for anything.
That's what you do now, isn't it, Graeme?
That he was great, and sadly he's died now. But one of those real characters of his flat was in Charing Cross Road, and I remember the first time I met him. I thought, what have I done here? When he opened the door in his underwear, and I thought, what have I done? But actually, it was great. He was great for me, and I loved it.
And then, like quite a few of our members who leave and go and do all kinds of other things, you came back.
I did. And what I really missed whilst I was working as a stage manager, as you get older, you kind of hanker after being in one place more. And also, I really wanted to be more creative than being a stage manager. And I knew that at the Crescent, you could do the big roles, direct plays that probably I wouldn't get the chance to do elsewhere. And so when I finally left London, moved back up to Birmingham, I remember first time I'd seen the new theatre. Actually, I couldn't get in. It's like, this was the old theatre. You could get in really easily. Just walk in, say I'd like to join. Couldn't do it. I tried several times. I know it's better now, but I got very frustrated. I got frustrated actually that the new theatre wasn't like the old theatre. Yeah. But it's like Stoke, the old theatre is not like the new theatre, and it's like, but that's life, isn't it? Really.
And finally, Graeme, we didn't tell you about this before because you don't need to prepare, but we do have some backstage binaries for you. These are quick-fire questions where you have two choices and you just have to pick one.
Okay.
And then at the end, you can clarify one of your choices if you would like to. Luke.
Okay, so first one. On stage or backstage?
On stage.
Studio or main stage?
Studio.
Act or direct?
Act.
Lighting or sound?
Lighting.
Rehearsal or performance?
Performance.
Modern or period?
Modern.
Comedy or tragedy?
Tragedy.
Set or props?
Props.
Silence or pause?
The crisis is in the silence. Always the silence.
Pinter or stoppard?
Oh, good question. But Pinter.
Yes, good. That's probably the right answer. The theme of the episode. Well done.
Can I just say there is a stoppard quote about before Pinter came along. Playwrights said what they meant. If they said they asked you a question, that's what they meant. Okay. After Pinter, just everything changed, and he thought Pinter should be thought of like Beckett. One of those people that are just above everybody else. I loved that.
Nice.
Thank you so much, Graeme, for coming onto the podcast, and we look forward to seeing A Kind of Alaska and Ashes to Ashes in the Crescent studio in a couple of weeks.
Really enjoyed it.
Thank you. As some of our listeners will be aware, this year is the centenary season of the Crescent Theatre Birmingham. This month, we've taken a look back through the archives to find out a little bit more about previous Crescent Theatre productions of the work of Harold Pinter. The double bill of A Kind of Alaska and Ashes to Ashes, taking place in October 2023, will be the 12th Crescent production to feature one or more plays by Pinter.
There have been 11 previous productions of 9 different plays by Pinter in the Crescent's 100-year history. The first Pinter to be performed at the Crescent was A Night Out in 1963. The piece had first been produced professionally, first on radio and soon after on television, 3 years earlier in 1960, with Pinter himself playing the role of Seeley.
The Birthday Party, The Homecoming, and the short radio drama Victoria Station have each been produced twice by the Crescent. We've never done Ashes to Ashes or A Kind of Alaska before, along with several of his other well-known plays, including No Man's Land and, surprisingly, The Dumb Waiter. Perhaps we'll try and fit those into the next century. Obtaining the performing rights to Pinter's work became more challenging for amateur theatres following the playwright's death in 2008, which understandably sparked significant activity in professional revivals of his work. So there was something of a hiatus in the Crescent's production of Pinter around that time. Thank you for listening to the Amateur of Life and Death podcast. If you'd like to listen to more, make sure you subscribe at podcast.crescent-theatre.co.uk or via Spotify or Apple Podcasts to get the next episode.
You can find out more about the Crescent Theatre Birmingham and our upcoming productions, including A Kind of Alaska and Ashes to Ashes, by visiting www.crescent-theatre.co.uk or by following us on social media. Amateur of Life and Death is a Crescent Theatre production. It is presented by Luke Plimmer and Liz Plumpton, with research by Liz Plumpton and Phil Ree. It was edited by Kevin Middleton, and the music is by Brendan Stanley.